Okay, class, I have a little 10-slide PowerPoint here that covers some of the historical and political context of the scientific revolution. So the first slide names 7 important people and their dates, and we're looking at a little more than 200 years from 1398 to 1630. And so what I'm going to do is just kind of go through and say how this person impacted the things that were going on, because what we've got is the confluence of science and religion and technology. And those three things end up really radically changing Europe of we'll call this the early modern era. Okay, so we're going to start with Gutenberg. He develops his printing press in 1444 to 1450. So this is huge because before that, books were very rare and very expensive, and very few people had access to them. Once you get movable type, a lot more people can have books. And it turns out one of the books that gets printed is the Bible, and is being printed not only in the Latin, which was the sort of approved edition of the Bible at that time, according to the Church of Rome, was the Latin version that was created by St. Jerome, sometimes called the Vulgate. And so the priests could read Latin. The people could not read Latin, but they might have read their own language like German or French or Spanish or Italian. And so the printing of Bibles in vernacular languages was a very big issue. So then we get the Spanish Inquisition. And so the Spanish Inquisition was in response to these people who are saying, you know what, we don't need to kind of take the authority of Rome so seriously anymore. And so among the various methods that the tribunal of the Holy Office of the Inquisition used to maintain Catholic orthodoxy was to impede the diffusion of heretical ideas in Spain by producing indices of prohibited books. Such lists of prohibited books were common in Europe a decade before the Inquisition published its first. The first index, published in Spain in 1551, was in reality a reprinting of the index published by the University of Louvain in 1550, with an appendix dedicated to Spanish texts. Subsequent indexes were published in the years 1559 through 1640. The indexes included an enormous number of books of all type, though special attention was dedicated to religious works, and particularly vernacular translations of the Bible. So, translations of the Bible, which people could read themselves, was considered to be very dangerous. And so people who were engaged in publishing them would have been persecuted by the Spanish Inquisition. Martin Luther, 1483-1546. He nailed his 95 Theses to the door of All Saints Church in 1517. So basically, he was opposed to some of the practices he saw. One of the ones that created the most opposition was the selling of indulgences. So in Christian theology, if you commit a sin, you go to confession, you can have the sin forgiven, but you still might have to do some time in purgatory, the sort of temporary place before you get to go to heaven. If you die with a mortal sin on your soul, you're going straight to hell. But if you had no mortal sins on your soul when you die, but you had done some bad things, violated some of the commandments, then you might spend some time in purgatory. But if you gave some money to the church, you could buy an indulgence, so you could buy your way out of spending time in purgatory. And Martin Luther thought this was a little suspect, and so that was one of the things he opposed. And so in 1517, he who had been a faithful person under the Church of Rome says, we're not gonna take this anymore. Okay. The next character we get is Nicolaus Copernicus. He is a Polish canon. He is someone who was trained in, educated in all the ways of the church. He did work for the church, but we don't believe that he took holy orders. So he was not an ordained priest. So he could not perform some of the sacraments that are limited to priests, such as saying mass, hearing confessions. You don't need to be a priest to baptize someone. At that time, you probably needed to be a priest to marry someone. So what he does is he writes his Revolutionary De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium in 1532. And this is presented as just kind of a hypothetical mathematical model that does a better job of explaining those things that are flying around in the sky. And he did it right before he died. He published it because he knew it was a little controversial, and so that gets published in 1532. Meanwhile, Henry VIII separates the Church of England from the Roman Catholic Church in 1534, and he does this because he wants to divorce this one wife that he's married to and pick up another wife, and the Catholic Church says, no, we can't do it. So he says, okay, I'm not listening to you, and he starts his own Church of England, and divorces that wife, marries another one, and then proceeds to go through several wives. He ended up with 8 of them, several of them I think he had put to death. And so the fact that you have in both Germany and in England, you have huge chunks of population who used to be faithful members of the Church of Rome have split. The Jesuit Order, founded in 1540 by Ignatius Loyola. So this is these are Spanish Catholics, and they're considered the they're a teaching order, they're an intellectual order, and they were the defenders of the faith. So at the time of the Spanish Inquisition, the Jesuits were in charge of rooting out heretics and seeing to it that people would not continue to misbehave. So that symbol up there, it looks like IHS. It turns out that's really not an H. That's a capital Eta, the Greek letter. Greek has 2 E's. Epsilon is the short E, Eta is the long E. So that's a capital long E. So what it really is, it's the first 3 letters of the Greek name for Jesus, Jesus. And so the Jesuits, it's called the Society of Jesus. And so that's what that IHS says in that symbol. Then we get the Counter-Reformation, 1545-1648. So during this period, the church is very actively engaged in trying to prevent any more large groups of people from leaving the church, as did so many Germans and so many English. And so we get the Council of Trent, 1534 to 1549, and they establish what is the official Bible and a variety of other things to try and keep order in the church. And then this Bellarmine, he is, his nickname was the Hammer of God. And so he was the one who ordered Galileo to abandon the Copernican doctrine in 1616. So we've read a few things by Galileo. Starry Messenger was before he was told that he could not adhere to the Copernican doctrine. And so he mentions 2 or 3 times in Starry Messenger that the Copernican doctrine is at least reasonable without actually saying that he's committed to it. In 1615, I think, is when he writes his letter to Grand Duchess Christina, which some of you have run into in Great Ideas 1. And so in that document, he's trying to defend his support for ideas that might question those portions of the Bible that are about natural science. And he's saying the Bible is infallible when it comes to matter of faith and morals, but it is not meant to be taken literally when it comes to matters of nature, because it doesn't even have all that much in there. So therefore we don't have to worry about the couple places where it says that the sun moved or the sun stood still. Okay, so, and then finally we get Pope Urban VIII, 1623-1644. And so he was the Pope when Galileo was put on trial. So his dialogue concerning the 2 great world systems, I think, comes out in 1632. Galileo was led to believe that Pope Urban VIII would be sympathetic to his support for the Copernican view of our solar system, and it's possible that he was intentionally misinformed by some Jesuits, or maybe it was just sort of an accident. But in any event, when he did publish that book, although he was fairly careful to make it seem like he wasn't coming out as an advocate for Copernicanism. Instead, he was writing a dialogue in which there was an advocate for Copernicanism, there was an advocate for the sort of Aristotelian Ptolemaic system, and then there was a neutral audience member who was listening to the dialogue back and forth. and yet it was deemed that he had disobeyed his 1616 order from Cardinal Bellarmine not to support Copernicanism. So therefore he was tried and found guilty of doing some misdeeds, and without actually having been tortured, he was shown the instruments of torture, and then he said, you know what, you guys are right, I was mistaken. This, the earth doesn't move. All right, so those are some of the things. So you've got science, you've got religion, but you also have technology. Two of the technologies are the printing press and the telescope, and these things loom very large in what ended up as what we'll call sort of the affair of Galileo.